talk about fears. Let's talk about love. Yeah, I got fears, but I ain't got no love.
So 8 o'clock, everything's okay. 9 to 9:30, security guard who is an off-duty deputy, sheriff deputy, moonlighting, if you will. He has another job as a security officer. He goes by and he still sees the lights on. He believes that she's just still closing up the store and is not alarmed. But he sees nothing out of the ordinary. At 10:45, the same security guard goes back by the store and notices the lights are still on. Now, red flags go up for him. He goes inside, and in a storage room, which is important, they find the body of Tracy Kirkpatrick. She was stabbed to death. So there's your timeline. I think you can narrow it down between 8 and 10:45 at the greatest, and maybe, you know, from 8 to 9:30 at the latest. But you would be making an assumption there, and we shouldn't do that in any investigations. So from timeline now, let's go to evidence. What is collected? What is seen? There are apparently no witnesses that saw anything out of the ordinary. Now, that is not uncommon. I correlate it to the yogurt shop murders, where there was really no witnesses to that crime either. And here you had 4 murders and an arson. So, and it was at the same time, you know, the store was closing. When a store is closing like that, the first thing you have to look at as motive to these murders, or any murders that happen when a store is closing, is robbery. The second thing I think that you have to look for is stalker, sexual fantasy type of killing. So we have to determine which it is in this, and maybe it's neither of them. But what the evidence shows is that there was a blood smear on the rear door, exit door of that store. Now that tells me that someone had to have known that there's a rear exit door. Now, not necessarily, right? Put yourself in the shoes. You're in there, you commit a murder, you had to have come in through the front, right? The only way you could have came in through the back, that door should have been locked. Now I say should have been because we don't know. We weren't there. But again, possibilities versus probabilities. To me, it's more probable the rear entrance door would have been locked. Now, I would want to know which way Tracy would exit when she left the store, when she closed. Because when the security officer found her body, the front door was still unlocked. Blood smear on the rear door and a partial print. I see that as great evidence, but it also, I believe, would show that he exited, the suspect. I say he. We'll get into whether it's a he or not, about the exit through the rear. That tells me more than likely that they knew that there was a rear exit. I'd like to know where that rear exit led, probably to a parking lot, but I don't know the store layout. I couldn't see that from any of the pictures that I got, but it is a clue. Now, let's get into some discrepancies. I preach this over and over again. Unless you have the police reports, you are always guessing and hoping. You're hoping that it's right, that the information that you are starting your investigation on is correct. In this instance, the newspaper articles the day after Tracy's death indicated she was stabbed 7 or 8 times. There was no defensive wounds and there was no struggle, indicating that she more than likely knew her offender. Now that last part, and they also said there was no evidence of a break-in, which would lead investigators to believe she knew her killer. Man, I have a big problem with that. Big problem with that. You cannot deduce that because there was no break-in, that she knew her killer. Let's say she's counting out the store receipts, closing out shop for the day, the door's still open. The offender walks in. She doesn't know him. He pretends he's shopping. She says, oh, we're going to be closing in 5 minutes. Yep, okay. He pulls a gun, let's say. Get in the back. Pulls out a knife. Kills her. There's no struggle in the store. So how can you say that she had to have known her killer because there was no struggle? That came from a police officer, one of the detectives. I'm hoping that's a mistake, because you cannot deduce that. Back to discrepancies. So I said she was stabbed 7 or 8 times. That's what is reported. I read an article from 20 years later who says this information came right from the autopsy report that was released to the newspaper, where she was stabbed 22 times. Head, neck, back, arms, chest, multiple fractures to her skull due to 3 stab wounds. Are you kidding me? See the discrepancies here? This case is a big teachable moment on that. The day after the murders, she was stabbed 7 or 8 times, no defensive wounds. 20 years later, read the paper, and the paper quoted its source being the autopsy report that was released to them, that she was stabbed 22 times in all those areas: head, neck, back, arms, chest, defensive wounds to her hand. That changes everything, right? It boggles my mind how things get distorted. And that is one of the reasons. Don't get upset at the police officers for not releasing info or thinking you know more than the police. Because I'm only here to tell you, you don't. Now, you can get mad at me. You can say what you want. The reason that is because they have all the info. Now, you may be smarter than the police when you get all that info and put it all together. Yes, then maybe. But knowledge is power, and they all have that. Now, what they choose to do with it, how you interpret that knowledge, well, that's a different story. So, it goes from a 7 or 8 stab wound, which tells me one thing, to 22, which tells me something completely different. Defensive wounds now, where before it was saying there was not one defensive wound, and she knew her killer. Changes things, okay? Now, that's not the most disturbing part about this case. The most disturbing part about the case is in June of 1990, so over a year, But according to the caller, a few months after this murder, there was an individual who made a call to a national confessional hotline. Didn't call the FBI, didn't call 911, didn't call the police department, didn't call the newspaper like Zodiac would have. What they did is they called this national hotline. Now, what I find interesting about this national hotline is that it's a pay-by-the-minute type of deal where you call and confess your sins. And then people pay to listen to them. Regardless, an individual called in and confessed to this murder. And I want you to listen to this confession and get your thoughts on whether you think this confession is valid or not. Take a listen.
Hello, my name is Don, and I'm calling from Fredrick, Maryland. I know this is going to sound surprising, but 3 months ago, I stabbed a girl to death. And you might think that in making this tape, I'm setting myself up to be caught, but there are a lot of guys named Don in Fredrick. The girl I killed was working in a ladies' sportswear store. I often came by and talked to her when she was working alone. And one night when she was in the storeroom and we were talking, our conversation turned into an argument. And so I took out a knife that I had with me at all times and I killed her. And a few days later I realized that I had created a lot of sadness. And I thought about turning myself into the police. But whatever they do to me, that won't bring Tracy back. So I decided that I better keep free because we have the death penalty in Maryland. Thanks for listening. I'm sorry about what I did, but nothing can change it. Bye.
Now, what do you think?